Another episode of Captive Thoughts here. Pastor Thomas, I'm bringing this out. Let me just go ahead and make sure that this is coming out live on the YouTube real quick. So I'm going to bring that on just to make sure that it is coming out. So hold on, everyone. Hope that you guys are doing well today and that you have had an excellent weekend and an excellent week as we get ready for Halloween. So you've probably been doing some things that are a little bit spooky or watching scary movies. Of course, a lot of places, a lot of churches and stuff have trunk or treats and that kind of thing. So a lot of that stuff going on right now for Halloween. I know that it's a lot of people's favorite times of year. I actually do really like Halloween. I know a lot of people don't, but I do. I think Halloween is a very, very fun time. So I enjoy it. But yeah, so today we're going to be talking about. Excuse me. We're not going to be talking too much about Halloween, although it will kind of come up a little bit here. But today one of the things that I really wanted to focus on was an emphasis on fantasy and fruitfulness. Some of the things that I've been thinking about recently. But first off here, our weekly proverb is Proverbs 21, Proverbs chapter 10, verse 21, which says that the lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for lack of sense. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for lack of sense. And when you read this proverb here, there's a couple of things that immediately stick out to me, right? When the Proverbs, they always have this sort of, well, the wise does this, but the fool does this, right? This sort of contrast here. And one of the contrasts that we see at this is that the righteous person, what they're always about is they always end up being a blessing to other people. Whereas the fool is, or the wicked, is very much self-focused, right? So, for example, the proverb right before that says, the tongue of the righteous is pure silver, but the heart of the wicked is of little value, right? Well, value ultimately means to other people, right? I mean, if something is valuable, it's not just valuable to you, but it's also valuable in the sense that people are considering it valuable. And when we see here in Proverbs 21 where it says the lips of the righteous feed many, we can look at that in a couple of different ways. Some interpreters have sort of said that, it's not a physical feeding, but it is a spiritual feeding. And I would agree with that, right? That, the lips of the righteous are providing encouragement. They're, of course, providing the words of life, right? Fully telling people about Jesus and eternal life. However, I think there's another aspect of this too, in just thinking about common wisdom to where, the lips of a righteous person, when they will feed many, is that when you're generally wanting good for other people, that will lead to doing good to other people. And, it's basically you're going to bless other people. And so when they're talking about the idea of it being food, right? Food is one of the basic things that people need in order to live. Righteous people are a blessing to those around them. But fools end up dying from lack of sense. At the end of the day, there's this idea of selfishness about the fool. The fool is of no use to anybody. The fool is someone who, in many ways, as Proverbs talk about, is a burden to a lot of people. So if you want to see if, are you a fool or are you righteous? Are you wise? Are you a blessing to other people? Are you feeding other people? Not necessarily physically, although possibly, right? But again, at the end of the day, are you a blessing to other people? Do other people enjoy having you around? Or do you seem to be more of a burden to them? Yeah. So that could be kind of a pretty good indicator here of if whether or not you are, again, righteous or not, or a fool or not. So, and kind of carrying on with this same theme here, one of the other pastors I was listening to recently was talking about giving people permission to have the thoughts that they really do have, but don't feel like that they can express. Things that they feel are right and true, but they can't express. This is something that I talked about recently with the men's group here. Is I basically asked them a question. I said, what do you feel is right? What's something that you feel is right, but you don't feel like that you can express it? And I've asked a couple of people this question. That would be the question that I posed to you guys today. So if you wanna comment on this and let me know. And of course, I'm going to try to get the link in the description for the Discord channel. You can maybe discuss it there, because I got a Discord channel set up now, where you can ask questions, and you can post a lot of different things, post prayer requests, passages, and things, aspects of Christian culture and whatnot. But what's the thought that you feel is right, but you don't really feel like you have permission to express it? So that's the question here. What's a thought that you feel is right, but you don't really feel like you have permission to express it? And we can see this by what people, in many ways, what people look up on the internet, what people talk about on the internet, right? And of course, again, even more so though, we're starting to see this kind of go away as people are cracking down on the internet, right? Well, yeah, I want to talk about this, I want to talk about maybe a certain type of, vaccine or shot or anything like that, right? You want to talk about, I can't talk about that, right? Oh, no. That's forbidden, right? Or you want to maybe talk about the election, right? Oh no, can't mention that, right? So there's all kinds of thoughts that people feel are maybe right or true, but you can't express. And I think that at this point in our life, we really need to start getting to the point to where we start expressing them, and we start asking the question, right? If anything, if we start bringing these things up for discussion. The way that I see society is society is essentially on a train of thought, and that train is heading off a cliff, right? And the only way to not go off the cliff is to jump off the train, essentially, right? And this is why, by the way, when you look at a lot of the political movements, the cultural movements, you've got your progressives, you've got the liberals and conservatives and whatnot, right? I mean, the progressives, they're in many ways they're driving the train, right? I mean, or they're at least up close to the engine. The conservatives, they're further back on the box cart, but they're closer to the caboose, but they're still on the train. And another reason, right? I mean, again, why conservatives? Well, don't conserve anything, because they're still moving forward. They just think that because they're further back that, it's okay. And I mean, again, we can see this, right? Look at where conservatives are now, and they're pretty much in a lot of ways where Democrats were in 2011. I mean, if you really look at how conservatives talk, how they function, what they say, again, they're pretty much where conservatives were in around 2011, 2012. I guarantee you, things were to keep going, by 2021, they'd be where the progressives are. And that's a consistent theme with conservatives. Again, as many people have pointed out, conservatives don't conserve anything. Well, and it's because they're on the same train. There are certain assumptions, certain presuppositions, certain things that you cannot question. But these ideas have a logical conclusion, and that's what the progressives are pushing towards. They're actually just a little bit more honest than the conservatives and the liberals here. But the conservatives and the liberals think that, they can hold these ideas, but for some reason, not follow the logical progression of them. Again, I used to just think that it was the liberals like that, but what I've come to realize is that in many ways it is the cultural conservatives as well. There are many ideas that have come up in the last 60 to 70 years that again do not work. We are seeing the logical conclusion of these ideas now, and culturally, progressives are on that train, culturally liberals are on that train, culturally conservatives are on the train. Again, it's just, where on this train of thought do you want to be? The problem is, again, the train is always moving. Time marches on. And so though you might think that, being further back on the box cart can save you, it's not. So you're going to have to get off of, which means that you're going to have to get uncomfortable or get comfortable with questioning some of these basic assumptions. What are the things that you've always been told, that society has told you? What are the truths that you cannot talk about, that you cannot question, but there's a part of you somewhere that's like, this feels right to me. I'll tell you the one for me, and a couple for me. One of the big lies, because ultimately, I mean, again, right? These ideas, they're not working because they're ultimately lies, and that's basically what you have to realize is you have to, for the Christian, you look at what was the baseline assumption. What was the base idea here? Is that idea truthful or is it not? Is it based off of what Scripture says? Is it based off of what God's declared through its word or not? Ultimately, is it not? Does it go against it, right? And so one of these ideas is the idea that men and women are the same, functionally, right? Practically. We can talk all day long about well, men and women are equal, and I don't disagree that men and women are equal. I think again they are equal, but both conservatives, liberals, and progressives think that men and women are essentially the same. They're the same in regards of function. They are the same, and as far as society is concerned, well, they should be treated the same. So there really shouldn't be any different roles. Well, anything a man can do, anything a woman can do, right? Other than having a baby, and we'll get to that one, right? We'll get to that in a second here. Well, men and women are the same, and they should need to be treated the same. We always need to look at them the same. And the truth is they're not the same, right? So now conservatives think that we can say this and we can kind of do this, but men will still kind of be men, and women will still kind of be women. And so they want to try to come up with ways to sort of, well, okay, how do we preserve like a 90s, 80s kind of culture, which kind of was holding this assumption, but the idea hadn't progressed further enough, right? It hadn't been sitting in people's minds far enough. So they want to go back to that, but you can't go back to that. It's too late, right? The liberals take this the next step, where, well, then it really doesn't matter, right? Like, it shouldn't matter who you marry then, right? I mean, again, if men and women are basically the same, well, then why should it matter if you're marrying a man or a woman? I mean, they're basically the same thing, right? So, I mean, again, why shouldn't two men marry? Why shouldn't two women marry, right? I mean, what difference does it make? Because there's no real difference between men and women anyway. And then, of course, then you get where the progressives are right now, right? Where it's like, well, there's no real difference between men or women, right? So why can't a man just say that he's a woman? Why can't a woman say that he's a man? Or, what is the whole point of genders and gender roles and norms? And all this is just kind of silly anyway. And again, right, it's the same train. It is the same train of thought, just at different points. But it's all based off of the same assumption, that men and women are basically the same. And they're not. Do they have a lot of similarities? Yes. And this idea doesn't work. Because it's not just, the acceptance of transgenderism. In trying to, believing this lie that men and women are the same, we are trying to force that fiction on reality. And by doing that, we tell men that they're dysfunctional women. And we tell women that they're dysfunctional men. Again, we see it backwards, right? We want men to try to act more like women, and we want women to try to act more like men. And that's what you see promoted. And it doesn't work. Women were not made to be men. And women don't want a girly man. They can say it, they can talk about it, but there's a reason why women pick Chad. Chad's not a girly man. Men don't want a manly woman. They don't want a woman that's going to be like a man. Now again, right, that might be fun in a moment. They might say, oh, it's surprising when the woman takes charge, and I like that. But truth is, long-term relationship, right? Guys don't like that. Because you're a man. Because you were made to lead. And the truth is long-term, girls like a man that's going to lead. We can't say that. Oh. Can't have the truth of what? men were meant to lead? We don't want to say that, though. We don't want to acknowledge that. I'd say, men, it's okay that you want to lead. It's okay that you want to want a woman that will follow your lead. And women, it's okay to want a man who's going to lead. You shouldn't have to be you shouldn't have to be leading. Women, be a woman that a man wants to lead. And men, be the man that a woman wants to follow. And this is getting into the bigger point here. Last week we talked a whole lot about not loving from at a distance, right? But loving close. Because that's really how you can love. You really can't love from a distance. I mean, you can try, right? I mean, you know, how do I explain it here, right? My parents, they don't live close to me. Now, on the one hand, do I love them? On some level, do I love them? Yes. But I don't have the same relationship with them that I have with my wife's parents because they live a lot closer. They're much more involved in my daughter's life. I see them more. I talk to them more. Now, we call that what? Well, we're closer to them. Because we can actually really love each other there, right? Love isn't just a feeling. It's actions. It's actions that you do with another person. Well, it's really hard to do for another person when you're not close to them. As I say, you're saying you don't love your parents? No, of course I love my parents. But it's not easy to love my parents, really, in terms of the verbal sense. I still have affection and care and everything like that. And when I'm with my parents, right, well, yes, I do love them. But when they are far away, it's hard to love them. I'm not involved in their lives. I can call them and I can talk to them. But if my mom had to go to the hospital right now, I could drive down there, but it's going to be 5 hours before I get there. I can't get there right away. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but the whole point is what? There's a big difference between that versus if my mother-in-law went to the hospital, I could be there 10 minutes. 20 minutes. Very big difference. And where I was going with that here is this idea that, again, another one of these base ideas. And really what the big train is, and it's made up of a lot of little lies, but the whole thing of the train is that we can make reality fit our fiction. And that's really what everybody wants to believe. If we all push hard enough, this thing that we know isn't true, this fiction that we have, this fantasy, we can make it reality. And there's a lot of people who want to live in fantasy. They don't want to live in reality. Really good example of this is I don't remember where the episode was, but it was several years ago when Guitar Hero was really popular, right? And South Park did an episode on it, and Stan and his friends were playing Guitar Hero, and Stan's dad goes out and gets a real guitar and actually starts playing the real song, and Stan and his buddies are like, "It's so lame. No, we don't want to learn how to play a real guitar. We want to play Guitar Hero." And the truth is, though, is that how much of that actually is true of all of us? We don't want to live in reality. We want to live in fantasy. No, I don't want to, right? I don't want to go out and have a nice neighborhood and be a part of a nice neighborhood. I want to watch a nice neighborhood on TV. I don't want to have a nice family. I want to watch a nice family, or again, right? I don't want to actually, I mean, again, pornography is in a lot of ways, right? I don't want to go out and actually, have to have sex with this woman here, right? Well, I want to just, watch it. It's a lot easier, right? I mean, it's to the point now to where video games is a type of this, right? And nowadays, it's gotten to the point to where we got people watching people play video games. So they don't even want to play the video game anymore, which again is in itself an attempt to sort of live in fantasy. I'm not knocking it. I'm not saying all video games are bad or anything like that, right? I'm not saying watching movies or anything like that. I'm talking about the mindset behind this, though, of trying to live in the fantasy world. Again, even to the point now to where we've got people watching somebody else playing a video game, watching them live their life, but not actually living life. And again, whereas, I'm not going to sit here and say that, watching movies is sinful or playing video games, because it's not sinful. You do sort of have to ask the question about wisdom, though, right? There's, sometimes it's important to ask the question, does God forbid it or does God command it? That's a good question to ask, right? And another good question to ask is, does it hurt my neighbor or not, right? And then the third question to ask is it wise or foolish? Is it wise to spend so much of your time in fantasy as opposed to reality? And is there an element of this? And again, I was listening to another pastor, and he's talking about this similar. He was talking, he was bringing this up, and he's saying at the end of the day, really, what does it do? It makes you want to live in that fantasy world, in a world that isn't real. Wouldn't it be neat if there were real life superheroes? I'm not knocking superheroes, right? But at the end of the day, well, they're not superheroes. And I've noticed that people begin to do this here. They start creating these fantasy situations, and they keep trying to apply them to real life. And we do this with arguments sometimes. We've begun to do this, right? It's like, well, what if Captain America was real? What if he did really exist in our world? And on the one hand, where it's maybe a fun Socratic exercise, right? People start thinking about all these different things. It's like, we really don't know because it's not real. We don't have any baseline comparison. It's in the same way that when someone says, well, how would the world be different if Einstein didn't exist in it, right? If Einstein wasn't born. We can guess, we can speculate, but we really can't really know. I mean, and even our best speculations are going to be horribly, horribly incomplete. Who knows the amount of people that there's way too many variables, right? Who knows the amount of people that Einstein had talked to, reached out to, communicated with, and the ripples effects of all of that, right? But we talk about it, we talk about that as if we could actually have any time, we're talking intelligently about that. And it's complete fiction. Another example of this. Go on YouTube and you will find tons and tons of videos about Star Wars history or Lord of the Rings history or the lore there, right? Or Star Trek lore or, Warhammer 64, right? Warhammer 40K lore, right? Whatever. All of these various things. And people will, they will study this. They will produce it. They will get it down right. And none of it's real. All of this time crafting, in studying these fantasy worlds. All that time spent doing that. And it's not real. And obviously there's going to be people saying, well, so what? Right, so what? So what if it's not real? What's your big deal? But what does it say about us that we're so wanting to live in these fantasy worlds right now? And again, at the end of the day, how's that actually benefited somebody? Well, you've entertained them. How much entertainment do we need? We haven't informed them. I mean, all this time spent on the history of, the Star Wars universe. What about our own history? And yeah, there are history channels on YouTube and people talking about too, but how popular are they compared to some of these other ones, right? And I really do think that that is a major mindset for people today, is we're trying to live in fantasy. We're trying to live a fantasy life. Or trying to live in fantasy. We don't want to live in reality. Because reality's hard. And this is another one of these lies that has been told and repeated, and conservatives believe it, and liberals believe it, and progressives believe it, and that is the idea that life shouldn't be hard. It is a humanistic idea. It's in many ways a nihilistic idea that life shouldn't be hard. That we should do everything in our power to make life as, reduce suffering as much as possible and maximize pleasure, right? And on the one hand, is there something to that? Yes, right? So I'm not saying that, we shouldn't ever try to reduce suffering here. But this idea that, life shouldn't be hard, right? I mean, we hear that, right? I mean, again, I remember when I was watching with my wife, a lot of, romantic movies, right? If something's not right, it's hard, it shouldn't be this hard, right? So many people feel like, life is hard, and they feel like that this is just some unfair burden for them. Life is hard. We've been told it's to be hard, right? The whole concept of Christians being mad at God because something happened to them in life, right? Something bad happened to me, so now I'm mad at God, now I'm blaming God, now I want to walk away from the faith. That whole thing comes from this mindset about life shouldn't be hard. But again, especially if you're a Christian, you should recognize that life is hard, right? I mean, Jesus says what? In this world, in this life, you will have tribulation. But fear not, for I have overcome the world. He says what? The servant is not greater than the master. Well, what happened to the master? Was his life hard? Why should we expect our life to be easier? That doesn't mean that it'll always be as hard. But the expectation is that, yeah, it will be. We're going to have tribulation in this life. It is hard. Work is hard. Work in many ways is bitter. Now, again, right, another one of these lies, right? If you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. That's a lie. It's not true. But we've got so many people jumping from job to job to job, and they won't stay at anything long enough because they believe that, okay, if I don't love it, well, it's work, and I shouldn't be doing it. And so you got a lot of people trying to do the things that they love, and of course, again, eventually they recognize that it's work. But that's just it. Everything is work. And there's an aspect of work that's bitter. It's part of the curse. What's it costing us living in fantasy land? You know, and it's not just people with entertainment, right? We do this with sports ball. We're watching people play sports ball. We're not out there playing sports ball, But we're going to watch them. We're going to wear their jersey. We're going to celebrate as if we accomplished something by watching them. And of course, again, I've heard it from tons of people, and you've probably heard it too. What? I yell at the TV because I think that they can hear me. Fantasy. It's fiction. Oh, but it's fun. But it's fun. Oh, okay. How much money goes towards those season tickets? How much time is spent with that? I'm talking about this a little bit more. I'm going to be on the Dashing Rogues stream, talking about the decline of Christianity. But imagine here if, rather than getting a bunch of people together and watching a game, what if you got a bunch of people together and actually played a game? Played football, played soccer, played basketball, whatever, right? And of course, again, how many parents have this fantasy that their kid's going to be a soccer star? And so they invest all of this time in their kid. They invest, a soccer star or a basketball star or a football star, a baseball star, right? And so they invest all of this time, all of this energy into this, and then the kid goes to college and, they don't play sports ball ever again for the most part. Not dogging sports. Sports has its place. But you're living a fiction. Over and over and over again, people are living a fiction. We're trying to make reality bend to our will. And until we recognize that, we're not God, we can't alter reality like that, still going to end up with a lot of suffering. Another lie that's on this train. Another aspect of this, another fiction that we're trying to make real, is the idea that sex can be disconnected from children. Now, I want to hear me on this. I'm not saying that the only purpose of sex is children. It's not. There's three purposes to sex. But children is one of those purposes, and you cannot disconnect it from the sex. But we try to do that. I've seen women saying, "Well, I consented to sex. I didn't consent to being pregnant." That's the logical conclusion. But again, right? We might look at that and we might say that that's silly, and yet how many of us act like that? How many of us actually act like that in our daily lives, and we treat people like that, right? I mean, fellas, right? I've heard this a whole lot from a lot of different guys, No, that woman wouldn't be a good mother. I'm going to have sex with her. She's hot. I'd have sex with her. No, she'd make a horrible mother. Then why are you engaging? If you think that she's going to make a horrible mother, then why are you engaging in the act that makes a child with her? Oh, safe sex, man. I'm being responsible. Yeah, doesn't always work. Oh, you sound like a boomer here. Well, if a boomer said 2 + 2 is 4, are you going to say that it's false because it's a boomer saying it? Not every form of safe sex, guess what? It prevents a baby. Now again, having a baby's not a bad thing. Having a baby with someone who's not going to make a good mother, that's a bad thing. That's another aspect here. This whole thing of fruitlessness and that somehow having children is bad. But we do this. We're going to join ourselves to a bunch of different people, have sex with a bunch of different people. No, we don't want to have kids with these people. We don't want to start a family with these people. We're going to do the act that makes children, but we don't actually want the children. You can't do that. And we're seeing that you can't do that. You cannot disconnect sex from having children. Is that its only purpose? No. Is that A purpose, yes. Is it one of the primary, when it comes to the biology, it is the primary purpose. The primary reason, biologically speaking, why people have sex is to produce a child. That's how it works. That's why it's called what? The reproductive organs. And we want to lie to ourselves and say, well, no, we can completely disconnect the two. We can disjoin the two. And you know what that's cost us? It's cost us the family. It's cost us one of the hierarchies of society. Society is made up of three hierarchies. You've got the state, the government, the polis, essentially. You've got the church, and you got the home. You want to know why the state's getting so much power? We've abandoned the church, and we're deconstructing and undermining the home. And so as these two other hierarchies are dwindled, the state is coming in and filling the vacuum. But eventually, if we continue on, that will collapse under the weight of the responsibility that we're placing upon it, because the state was never meant to carry all of that. There are some things that the church is meant to do. This is another one of these fictions that people want to have, especially a lot of people who are so-called Christians. They want to have the fiction to where I can love Jesus. I love Jesus. I'm a Christian, but I don't like organized religion. Well, guess what? Jesus organized religion. He had followers. He gave them rituals to do. Right? Paul, one of his followers, right, gives instructions to organized people. There are leaders. There are people who are called out by these leaders to serve and have other duties here. They have meetings. They make decisions. All sounds very organized to me. Doesn't sound like they're just running around in chaos. You've got different offices in this. You've got different procedures on how to do things. There are correct way to do things and there are incorrect way to do things. We even know that from earlier on there was a document known as the Rule of Faith that had a basic understanding of what the beliefs of this organization was, or this church. So the idea that, well, I love Jesus but I hate religion, that's a fiction. You're lying to yourself. You will not be spiritual. You will not love God. I guess I could say that. You could be spiritual, but you're not loving God when you're not going to get involved in any kind of organized religion. But as we've gotten out of that, a lot of people have abandoned that, and we see that number grows more and more each year. As we've deconstructed the family, we've broken up the family. Because a lot of us don't even want to have kids anymore. But we want to have sex. We want to engage in bonding with somebody through sex and producing children. We want to engage in that act, but we don't want to engage in, we don't actually want to have the children, so we want to do it, but then we don't actually want to do it. And that's causing us, again, to not really be able to make firm connections with people. Yeah, when a man and a woman have a child, guess what? That child connects them in a very significant way. That's in part what the Bible means when it says the two shall become one flesh. Mother and a father come together. Oh, look, a baby, one flesh. But trying to live that lie is driving us insane. And so we see state gets more power. Do you get it? Do you get how each one of these starts out as a lie? Sex doesn't have, it's just sex, right? That was the lie. It's just sex. As if to say, it's not connected to family, it's not connected to children, it's not connected to marriage, it's just its own thing out there. That's the lie. And as people have gravitated towards that, as they've accepted that, And as they've continued on with that, you can see the deterioration. You don't need church to love Jesus. That was the other lie. And we've seen the result of that. We're trying to live lies. And this is reflected by the fact that we are more and more wanting to live in fantasy, by wanting to live in our TVs and our movies and video games and books and fiction books and all this other stuff. So much entertainment, so much of it is devoted to that, where we talk about it, we cosplay about it. And we're missing out on reality. We're missing out on real life. And, well, guess what? A lot of people are miserable. So we got to repent. We got to get off the train. We got to stop feeding that and start living in reality, which means what? Yeah, it's going to be hard. You want to know how you can have a good community? By getting together and talking to the people who live around you. Forming a good community. Well, that's not really possible for me. Okay, well, guess not. That's another aspect here, right? We want to think that we can have communities online. And what are our communities based off? They're not based off of proximity. They're based off of common interest or common things, which isn't necessarily bad. There is a certain amount of, that has to exist, a certain amount of common values and interests that has to exist within a community. But the proximity also matters. When you're far away with someone with these online communities, you control whatever they see about you. That's not always the case for face-to-face interactions. There are things that you will expose about yourself that you don't recognize. And the person can respond to that. And that helps you grow as an individual. Just as like when you respond to some of the things that they do. But online, you can do that, but it's completely up to you. You can completely control how people see you. You can completely lie. It's not the same, but we want to believe that it is. This is what I mean. We're trying to live by lies, and we're trying to make fantasy reality. Progressives are doing it. They're further down than we are. Liberals are doing it. Conservatives are doing it. Over and over and over again. You got to get off the train. What have you been told that's true? What is the baseline thought of it? Where did it come from? Where did this idea come from? And find the origin of that idea and then evaluate it. Is it true or not? You can go to God's Word and see if it's true or not, but really, there's a part of you that knows if it's true or not. When you really start doing that, that's why a lot of this stuff is beginning to collapse. But going on box carts that are further back, that's not going to help. The way out is to jump off. Get off that train of thought. It's not leading to anywhere good. It's not going anywhere good. And again, this is, we could apply this to the church too. There are a number of ideas that the mainstream church, if you will, most churches have picked up and are rolling with, and they may or may not even be true. Time to start questioning some of those ideas. And I'm not talking about the doctrine things, right? I'm not talking about that. I mean, you can question doctrine, but again, as you go to Scripture, you can see that, yeah, it's okay, it's consistent. But what are some of these ideas? What are some of these traditions that we've picked up in churches? And I'm not talking about singing hymns, and I'm not talking about, having pulpits or pews or whatever. But what are some of these things that we've picked up that are, again, consistent with the current mindset? I'll tell you one thing I see in a lot of churches, right, is that new is better. Who told you that? That's a major mindset. I was talking to someone today, and even they acknowledged it. Yeah, a lot of churches, that's the majority mindset right now, is that new is better. And so we need to be disconnected from our past. We need to be disconnected from the legacy of the church. Nah, man, don't give me those old hymns. I want some new contemporary song. You know what? I grew up in that. Now, we weren't disconnected from all of the traditions or anything like that, but see, growing up, I believe, all I was really taught was that there was the early church, there were the disciples, right? And then there was us. Now, not that my church was the only church in existence, but essentially there was the modern church. And so there's essentially this giant gap of time. I had no information about growing up. I had to get that information in college. I had to get the information in seminary. And what a shame. What a shame that the church that I grew up in believed that there was nothing that they could learn from the Christian witnesses that had come before them. And there's a certain amount of arrogance in that too. But that mindset's still there. It's this same mindset of we're going to tear down some ideas, but we're going to tear down these ideas, or we're going to tear down the dressings of these ideas, but we're going to hold on to them, and then we're going to rebuild new dressings over here. And that, by the way, is one of the reasons why the church is the way that it is because the church actually hasn't changed. It's just changed on the outside. We're going to stop having pulpits, and we're going to stop having pews, and that's going to make us less legalistic. But here you go. Now we're going to have chairs, and we're going to have a table now as opposed to a pulpit, but we're still going to keep preaching moralism. We're not going to be like those televangelists. Instead, we're going to try to coerce people out of their money. We're going to guilt them if they don't give enough. We're going to say that they've got to give till it hurts. Again, it's ways in which the church is trying to live in fantasy. Not reality. Church is trying to live in fantasy in that somehow you cannot teach the Bible, but yet know the Bible. The church is living in fantasy and thinking that at best 3 hours a week of Christian teaching, and that's at best, that's not the most likely scenario, but that's one of the best case scenarios, that 3 hours a week of Christian teaching is going to stand against 40 hours a week of anti-Christian teaching. It's fantasy. If we can just look enough like the world, well then they'll like us. Again, living fantasy. And so that's what, I encourage you to do. That's where we are as a world. That's where the world is. That's where, I guess I'll speak specifically for, United States, America. We are all trying to live a fantasy. We are trying to live a lie. There are several lies that have been told and retold for a long time. They were not true then, they're not true now. And so you have to reject those lies. You can't just reject the lies as they've changed, as they've progressed logically. That's why conservatives don't really conserve anything, because essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, no, yes, we will accept the lie, but we're not going to accept this logical conclusion from the lie. And then eventually they do. And then they do it again. And they do it again. That's why progressives, well, that's why they call it progress, right? Well, they're proceeding along what? Along the logical conclusion of the thought, but the problem is that the thought is based on a lie. Another big lie, right, that is prevalent within the church is that gentle means like weak, essentially. That not, it's creating this sort of weird dichotomy that, you either have to sort of be all in for sin or you have to basically be, Ned Flanders. As if you can't be a Christian and not be one of those things. And I mean, again, right, this, look at other people from church history, man. Really look at some of the people, right? I mean, look at Augustine. Look at John Chrysostom, look at Luther. Look at, Spurgeon, Charles Spurgeon, Jonathan Edwards, Francis Schaeffer. And tell me that any of these guys are like Ned Flanders. But that's what we all seem to think. That's just some belief that we have. Man, well, if I really become a Christian, if I really submit myself to the authority of Scripture, I'm going to end up like Flanders. All right, at least that maybe you haven't done that. I've thought that for a long time. I've got to keep one foot in the world. I got to keep, because I don't want to be like, what's essentially a caricature, and it's not even a real caricature. That's the thing. Ned Flanders isn't a caricature of Christianity. He's just a straight up lie. He's a caricature of the lie that many Christians believe. I'll give you that. But he's not a real representative of Christianity. He's a parody of this faux Christianity that's emerged. The more people decide that they're not going to live in fantasy anymore, that they're willing to live in reality, that they're going to stop believing these lies, recognize the lies for what they are, and repent of them, the better off we'll be. And the thing is again, then we can stand in truth. And it's great. Standing in truth means what? You're standing with God. And He's got you. He's got you. He's not going to let you go. He will keep you. He will preserve you. So you can stand with Him in truth against the lies of the current age. And you can let them, and at that point too, when you're standing in truth, you can watch what's happening and not be afraid. I really think right now that, in the coming months, in coming years, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think in the coming months, in the coming years, it's going to be a time of great joy for Christians, and it's going to be a great time of anguish for a lot of other people. Now, both people are going to be going through hard times. Christians are going to have very hard times going forward. I do believe that. I believe that people who are not Christian are going to have very hard times going forward. But I think for people who genuinely believe in Christ, Christ is saying he will call them to live in him, in truth. He is tearing down the lies one way or another so that his children will leave them. And they can see them for the lies that they are. And they can rejoice that they're no longer bound to them. Because they never were. They were only bound to them because they held on to them. For everybody else, it's going to be a lot of anguish, because as these things are destroyed, this is what they worship. This is what they put themselves in, their meaning in. And so it's going to be very, very hard, very tragic for them. It's like when Babylon falls in Revelation, right? Where people see the city of Babylon fall, and there's lots and lots of weeping, but not from believers. They can see the city fall, they can see it collapse, and know why it's collapsing. And know that Christ has them in the midst of its collapse. So, to kind of close this off here, I'm not saying that, watching TV is bad or sinful. Not saying that playing video games is bad and sinful, so don't hear me say that. There is a general mindset in the world today, though, of that we are living by lies. We have believed lies that were told long ago, and we are seeing the logical conclusion of these lies. In trying to live in these lies, we are attempting to live in fantasy as well, because we know that deep down that they're not true, but we're trying to force them to be true. And so I think this in part is causing us to live in fantasy. And playing video games and watching lots of movies and being in fantasy and fiction reinforces that. So whereas it's not sinful, it may not be the most helpful thing right now. What might be the most helpful thing is if you focus more on those, again, those who are near and what's real, right? Love those who are near and what is real, what is true. Not the fantasy, not the fiction. You don't need it. You will be okay. You will be satisfied. You will be filled. All of that you get from the entertainment, from the fantasy. You will have what you need. Whatever fantasy does for you, whatever this fiction is doing for you, right? You'll be given something better if you let it go. If you're willing to let it go. And you're willing to live in the real world. Not saying, you got to completely abandon. You can't ever play video around. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, ask yourself, how much am I enslaved to it? How much do I really feel like I need it? And what am I getting from it? And is it the most helpful thing right now? So, all right. That's going to do us for today. I hope that you have a fantastic weekend. I hope that you do have a good Halloween weekend. And, even there, one of the fun things about Halloween is that is a time to where you can engage in a little bit of fantasy. And I think that that's a time to where it is a little bit appropriate, even if it's, again, right? So being careful with how much of your life is fantasy. But yes, stepping into the fantastic every once in a while isn't necessarily bad. And that's Halloween that gives opportunity to do that. So Hope that you do enjoy your Halloween. You have a good weekend. Thank you for everyone who's watched this. I appreciate you guys who are watching this. And of course, feel free to comment. And main question, if you'll remember the main question I asked, is what is a thought that you believe is right or feel is right, but don't think that you can express? So I'd like to see that in the comments section. If you have any other questions, anything that you'd like for me to try to answer here as far as the scriptures are concerned, we'll go into that. So I'm still trying to get a feel for the show, but still playing around with it. It'll be good. You can see how it goes. So, like I said, thank you again for everyone for tuning in, and until I talk again,